Okay.
All right, here we are ready for another episode of Coffee with the Founder.
I love that cup.
Got my Moana cup today. Got my coffee, and of course we have another phenomenal guest, a good friend, a colleague, a true sister actually, here with us, Tafeni English. Tafeni, we are doing coffee talks as a way to introduce people in our network, in our family, to one another better. So let's get started, because I want to get into what you're doing, where you're doing what you're doing, so folks can get to know you better. Can you start by telling us, though, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so good to see you. Good to see you. And I'll put this in before I tell everybody who I am. I think it was last year. I was getting on a flight heading to Boston, or maybe, yeah. And I saw this guy sitting in this seat, and I said, "Is that Dr. Moore? I hadn't seen you in so long, and it was so good to see you still doing what you do. You were going to a community. Anyway, so it's good to see you again, and I definitely have kept up with WPC, so good to see you. So just a little bit about who I am. I'm Tafeni English. I work for Southern Poverty Law Center. I specifically work at the Civil Rights Memorial Center, which is a project of Southern Poverty Law Center. I define myself and my work by my commitment to social justice, which I oftentimes tell people. Years ago, I would have told you that I accidentally landed in this job at SPLC. But what I know now is that it was just a divine appointment for the type of work that I would spend the rest of my life doing. So I started working for Southern Poverty Law Center in 1996. And I worked for what was then Klan Watch, but later became the Intelligence Project. And then I went to the Teaching Tolerance Department. I left in 2008 and spent 10 years working for fair housing locally here. And then I just returned last year to Southern Poverty Law Center as the director of the Civil Rights Memorial Center. So that's me in a nutshell and who I work for.
Yeah.
So,
now,
and forever becoming in this work.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you because it's been a long time since we encountered each other when you were in, I think, Teaching Tolerance, or maybe in Klan Watch, or maybe a little bit of both. And the center has changed, issues have changed. I mean, lots going on. But let me first ask you to just tell people what the Southern Poverty Law Center is, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows. So can you give folks a sense of what the Southern Poverty Law Center is?
Right.
And how it's evolved since you started initially in 1996, even though you took a little time off, to now you're back, here we are in 2020.
Yeah. So it definitely has evolved. The Southern Poverty Rights Organization. Their headquarters are in Montgomery, Alabama. The two founders grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, graduated from the University of Alabama Law School. And after the passage, after graduating from law school, they both decided to come back to Montgomery and put their efforts into litigation. And what a lot of people don't know is that Southern Poverty Law Center actually started out as a private law firm, and they were working to enforce civil rights laws that they knew that would be very difficult in the Deep South, right? And so that's what they're focused on. Later, they became a nonprofit organization, and litigation kind of started out with entities. There, one specific case that I'll talk about is the YMCA case, which they were litigating to integrate the YMCA and also school systems here still in Montgomery. But the YMCA case was one of their landmark cases. And, you know, a judge ruled that the YMCA had to allow Blacks to access the recreational facilities, specifically the pool. The YMCA here in Montgomery, their response to that verdict was to close the pools completely, right? So we knew that there again would be an uphill battle, you know, just in response to even court rulings that would say that you have to integrate these public facilities, you have to integrate the school systems. And around 1981, a young man by the name of Michael Donald was murdered in Mobile, Alabama. And he was murdered by members of the United Klans of America. And so Southern Poverty Law Center looked really closely at this case, and that was when they decided that they would actually take on the Klan in civil court. So after the criminal proceedings were completed, the two men were convicted. A jury came back with a $7 million verdict against the United Klans of America, and that bankrupted the United Klans of America. And so that set the precedence for Southern Poverty Law Center. And I think a lot of people know Southern Poverty Law Center for being the entity that went after white supremacist organizations, right? And so after the United Klans of America case, there was the Medgar Evers case where Mulugata Sarah was murdered in Oregon, and it was found later that this was done by a group of skinheads who were under the leadership of Tom Metzger. And then there was the, you know, the neo-Nazi case against the Aryan Nations. There was this, I forget the name of the Klan group, but they were in South Carolina, and they were responsible for a number of arsons at Black churches, right? So that set the evolution for the litigation against the white supremacist organizations. Fast forward today, the legal department has definitely expanded in their work. And so you don't see a lot of cases against white supremacist organizations. Actually, we see very few now. And it's not because they're not organizing, they're not active. It's just really the level of work that they're doing. And, you know, when you get to criminal court, they're not being fully charged or they're being convicted, and then there's no space for civil litigation, right? And so over the years, the work has expanded more about, and the focus has become more on systemic issues such as criminal justice reform. We have our children's rights arm, immigrant justice. We have a voter rights practice group, and also our economic justice practice group, right? So it definitely evolved. The other thing that has been significant in the change is that there is this focus specifically on the work being done in the Deep South. And so we have offices in Florida, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, and then we have an office in DC, and that office is primarily focused on policy. So that's another area of evolution that the center has began to focus on. Yeah. And of course, we are continuing the work with the Intelligence Project and also our Teaching Tolerance Department, whose focus, of course, is on educating anti-bias curriculum. And so those two programs, which I call, you know, kind of the core programs of Southern Poverty Law Center, have continued to evolve and strengthen over the years.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you about the museum, because that seems to be a strengthening and expanding aspect. But before that,
yes.
Can you give us a sense of teaching tolerance? Because you were there when that seed was planted initially. Or
yes.
How did that come about? And as you mentioned, I mean, it's just become one of the more pivotal and important pieces, I think, in a lot of ways where young people get familiar with the Law Center now.
Right, right. think teaching tolerance, again, it spanned out of, the center was monitoring the white supremacist organizations. And so you ask yourself, okay, we're monitoring these white supremacist organizations, but how do we stop this from happening, right? How do we change and shape people's perception about how they see each other? And so teaching tolerance was born really out of this notion that educators could go in and reach our young minds, because we know that, kids at a very, very young age, they start to form their perception about people, right? They start to see differences. And you have the influence, right, at a very, very early age. And so the premise was to offer resources to educators so that they could be the influence to the children. And we, of course, looking at only K through 12 education and the number of hours that students spend at school with educators. So the idea was to provide free resources. Initially, it was a magazine, and then we started building these curriculum kits, which I'm sure you're very familiar with them. Some of the more recent ones is Mighty Times, which is an education curriculum focused on, the Children's March, which focuses on the movement, right? And the power of young people in shaping and shifting the civil rights movement, how what was happening in Birmingham, also known as Birmingham, during the height of the civil rights movement, garnered national and global attention to what was happening in the South, right? And so when you have this curriculum, this anti-bias and social justice curriculum, the approach is to encourage children and young people to, one, identify and challenge the prejudice and the racism that they may be learning, whether it's in the home or just on the internet now. We know children are definitely inundated with messages that are coming across the internet. And one of the things that's been happening in the midst of the COVID-19 is that teaching tolerance has been very intentional about that warning, and the importance of monitoring what's happening with their children on the internet. So that's the teaching tolerance department. But definitely one thing I would like to say about the teaching tolerance program, which this was happening prior to me leaving, and Eddie, you might remember this, which is the professional development piece, where they actually started recruiting educators from across the country to serve as this advisory council to really give feedback and drive and pushing out what the lesson plans and curriculums would look like. And I think that also was where we started doing the teaching hard history, right? So looking at the civil rights movement, it is more than Dr. King and Rosa Parks. So it's very easy to talk about the heroes and sheroes of the movement, but really being able to put that into context about what it was that they were fighting for and what they were hoping, and also equipping young people with where we need to go, where they fit into this paradigm as change agents.
Yeah. Now, Alabama is in the South, as you mentioned. The center has really made a commitment to battling some of these issues deep in the South. Often people say, the North is unlike the South, or the North is not free of racism, but it's different because the South, it's more out in your face, so to speak. But I don't know if people know what that feels like. I still don't know if people know what the South is like. So can you talk a little bit about what is the current state of these issues that you deal with in the South today? And being someone that was, born, raised there, growing up there, working there now. I mean, are you feeling optimistic? What's your sense?
You know, Eddie, again, as you know, born and raised here, native Alabamian, I will say there are days I feel optimistic, and then there are days when it's just like, whew, to just start all over, right? Not start over. We just need new, right? I will say that there is movement in the South, but there's also an enormous amount of oppression here, and it is politically driven. And you know, specifically when I look at what happened with the Shelby case, the voting rights, you know, that was out of Alabama, which allowed gerrymandering and allowed people to have these voting districts that would, again, just continuously be against the best interests of the people. And one thing that I often have to keep my focus on, it is the work that organizations like SPLC is doing, work that the ACLU is doing, work that grassroots organizations are doing, because they are definitely rising. I can't say enough about Black Voters Matters and the work that they're doing throughout the South. I can't say enough about coalitions that are forming, and they are happening, but there are times when you just shake your head and say, nobody's listening, right? Nobody's listening. And I think what we have to really understand and realize is that this deep-seated racism, although it's not specific to the South, it seems to be much more personal in the South, right? The intent to continuously pass laws and legislations that would harm people of color, Black people, immigrants, and to harm the educational system, to basically dismantle everything that the movement put into place, right? You know, today is Malcolm X's birthday. And I think back to just his evolution and the things that he often pointed out, which one is, we're not responsible for the oppression, but we are definitely responsible for our liberation. And we really have to stop thinking of that in the context of it being this group of people, and that group of people. That will be a collective effort from all of us. And even going back to your mission and vision for the white privilege. First time, Jennifer was like, hey, I want you to meet Eddie. We're going to get involved with the White Privilege Conference. And I thought, what is that? And then, but my first question was, but is that my responsibility? I remember having these conversations, and I'm so grateful for the growth, right? Because of course, you know, everybody knew who Jane Elliott was. Yeah. And I was like, is this just gonna be an evolution of that? Are we gonna be sitting talking about, you know, the blue eyes and the dark skinned doll and all that? But what I realized is that we have to really focus in and hone in internally. And that internal drive definitely has to come from all of those kind of who paved the way before us. You know, I have a 20-year-old who knows everything, who asks me all the time, like, why do you keep doing this? You know, you all should have taken care of this back then. But I always have to stress to her that, you know, what was set up then, the people in the movement didn't think that they would answer all the problems. They knew that they would be passing the baton. But this is a ever evolving fight. And I feel like, especially since 2016, while some things have been rolled back, we have some new tools and resources that we have that we really can fight the system. on what is created in our country.
Yeah.
And challenge some of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you, because I think you, and because of the work you do and the place where you work, can really offer some insight around white supremacy and white supremacists. Because I think there's been this conversation, this rhetoric about white supremacists are on the rise. And I don't want people to use that loosely. If you don't have the information, the knowledge, I don't want you to just be saying that because you heard it said. Can you speak a little bit about, I mean, you're at the organization that bankrupt the Klan. So my question to you is the Klan back? Or how have they recovered? What's your sense of their state of the condition that they're in now versus what happened to them when the center initially took $7+ million away from them?
Right. So there definitely was, after that lawsuit, there was a dismantling of the organized KKK as we knew them. But that did not stop individuals or group of people from still sharing those core beliefs of the KKK. What the lawsuit did was where people were so emboldened to be out front in public, and they were proud of their card carrying membership. They would flash it if they wanted to intimidate Black people who were gathering, right? So that's what we didn't see anymore, right? But the racism was still there, the organizing was still there. And today, I just want to say, like with the KKK, the neo-Nazis, and the skinhead, the Intelligence Project lumps those all together with white nationalist groups, because at the core, they believe that white identity is superior. They believe that white identity is the organizing principle of our country, and they don't believe that Black people or people of color have any rights. And what has shifted is this firm belief that there's a shift in demographics. They believe, because of this notion that in 2044, we'll be living in a minority country, that is a threat to white democracy, right? It's a threat to them. And so they don't see the value in multiculturalism. They don't see value in diversity. They definitely don't see value in racial equity, right? So their whole premise is to preserve the white race. And in order to preserve the white race, they feel as if they have to control the narrative. And we see where they've actually seeped into politics, right? Never, ever in my lifetime did I ever expect to see, coming from the highest office of the land, where there is this notion that it is definitely an us versus them, right? Not that it couldn't be there, but just not that it would be so out blatant in our face. And what we see with white nationalism, we go back to the rally in Charlottesville. Although by their accounts, they were there to protest the removal of a Confederate monument, I believe, if it was their whole theory. But that was the first time that we actually saw a number of groups, KKK, neo-Nazi, skinhead, Christian identity, all convene in this intentional manner. And if you all recall, Heather Heyer was murdered at the Charlottesville rally, right? There are two men right now. The center published a story a couple of days ago, and two men who denounced the alt-right after the Charlottesville rally, but there are still questions about their involvement, right? So you still have this notion where they don't want to be affiliated with these horrible acts of violence and crimes and murder. But then you have to dig deeper, and that's what our Intelligence Project does, right? They investigate, they monitor, and they publish this information publicly so that people will know about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's important that, as the center to evolve how we look at this connection, and looking at their far-right ideologies and how that attack is really being used as political correctness. And I will say the hate count group, the hate count number, I think was like 900 something this year, which was a slight decrease from 2018. But what is striking about that is that we did see a 55% increase in the white nationalist groups. And then we saw an over 40% increase for those LGBTQ hate groups. And what's important about that is that the LGBTQ groups, they have the most political power inside and outside of the mainstream, because oftentimes their focus, again, it's an attack on religion, or, it's an attack on the very way that we raise our children, and they see it as such a negative influence on people, and that's what they continue to use to fight their agenda.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about immigration and the center's work around that, because I think when I first encountered the center, not that those issues weren't there, but it definitely today is a different time. And you mentioned some of the political policies and leaders, particularly coming from the highest office in the land, where we have some direct policy connected to this issue, anti-immigrant, coming out of the office. So I want to ask you about that. But before that, I've been trying to get a sense of the role of people of color in supporting alt-right white supremacist groups, because it seems like that is different than when WPC got started and we all, kind of encountered each other as well. What's your sense of people of color, Black folks specifically, in some cases, like Candace Owens as an example, really seeming to be in collaboration, or at least denial that these groups are as prevalent? What's been your experience, your sense of the role of people of color in white supremacist groups?
Annie, I really think that it's really a decision to deny what is factual and true. And I also think that there is a lot of misinformation about white nationalist group and alt-right groups. And unfortunately, I do feel like people like Candace Owens have bought into this idea or this notion that multiculturalism, diversity, racial equity, immigrant justice are all a plot to keep us oppressed, right? And I really just can't say much more about that. I just think that they're grossly misinformed. And I think that they bought into an agenda where they somehow feel like they're somehow different, right? And that the white nationalists or alt-right doesn't see skin color. They just want a better America. And that is not, in their own accounts, that is not who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I just didn't know if it was the money or, years ago, it seems like the presence of people of color was part of almost like undercover work to disband the organizing and the protesting, where now, there is outright revenue associated with joining and aligning yourself, whether it's a speaking gig, whether it's a YouTube channel, whether it's presence on national TV. So I just think that's something, it's going to be really interesting, particularly as we look at, I think, the next 10 years. And again, the presence of—
I agree. I think money is behind it. I think money is a factor as well. I can't remember. I was watching something on YouTube the other day. I kept hearing this voice, and I said, well, who is that? And I go to look, and it's Candace Owens. And I was like, what the heck? I was like, oh no, sister, I don't do you. But but it was just her presence, right? And just what was coming out of her mouth. And I remember saying, like, you've just fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. and it doesn't apply to you. Like their theory and their way of operating just doesn't apply to us.
Yeah, that's gonna be one, I think, the most interesting thing over these next 10 years. Let's talk about immigration. Can you just talk a little bit about the work y'all are doing and what's the state of some of the issues and concerns around immigration?
Let me tell you, I cannot, our immigrant justice practice group is just fire. You know, I'll just say that we have some amazing colleagues who are on the ground, continuing to do a lot of work. You know, this was one of the earlier practice groups of Southern Poverty Law Center, which was immigrant justice work. And initially that work centered around detention facilities and legislation that we were seeing passed that was going to unfairly target immigrant families. And just in the years it's evolved, we have our Southeastern Immigrant Freedom Initiative, where we have people who are on the ground in these rural, remote areas where the detention facilities are. And of course, due to COVID-19, they've been unable to get into the detention facilities. But we have colleagues who show up on a daily basis prepared to provide legal counsel to individuals in these detention facilities who otherwise may not ever see any due process in court. So, you know, they definitely have evolved over the last several years. And I'll just kind of highlight what they're doing now under COVID-19. I don't know if you're familiar with, we have a C4 now, right? Which is the SPLC Action Fund, which allows us to do a lot more policy work. And I just encourage anybody who's listening to, you know, I just want to plug this in, go to our website, because we're definitely highlighting the stuff that we're doing on a daily basis as it relates to COVID. But one of the things that the Immigrant Justice Department has done is they've actually done a lot of work on the ground with the Department of Corrections and the prisons and inmates that we serve, in demanding that they have policies in place for what they're doing in the midst of COVID-19, right? And I know that there's this ongoing series that they're doing, which is an attention on the detention facilities, where they are actually having people who are sharing from the inside things that are occurring as a result of COVID-19 while they've been detained by ICE. So that's some of the recent work that they're doing in response to COVID-19. But also on the policy front, they are keeping an eye on the movement administration and looking forward to what will happen after this next election, and looking at potential policies that are coming down the pipeline that would negatively affect or impact the immigrant communities.
So speaking of COVID-19, how are you doing with this shelter in place? But also, I mean, just there in the community where you come from, where you grew up, the larger state arena, what's your sense of how folks are doing in general as well? Because I think it's safe to say we're living in some unprecedented times.
We really are. And I remember, of course, when all this talk started about COVID-19, because I grew up in Alabama, and I grew up in rural Alabama, I immediately felt this anxiety about rural communities. My mom is still in my hometown, Lincoln, Alabama, and I just because of the lack of access to good health care, the proximity of where, you know, she was to a hospital, and also what we know about rural communities is not just lack of access to healthcare facilities, but it's lack of access to information. And I think that was the most dangerous thing, because if they didn't have access to the information, if they really didn't have an idea or understanding of how serious this was, you happen? One, they just go about their lives, right? They go to the grocery stores, they meet up with family, you know, they don't know. And then the other thing is, when they do know, how likely is it that they could actually get care because they're so far away from healthcare facilities? And the other thing is the number of elderly people of color who are still in these rural communities. I think about Lowndes County and Dallas County, which is known as the Black Belt, right? And who don't understand data, but also understand that in our state, they've never been important, right? So we see all of these headlines about, oh my gosh, these racial disparities. We've always known that they've been there, right? 19 is elevating that. And so that was my initial worry. And then with our leadership in the state, right? Rural communities are oftentimes forgotten. They're good enough to get federal dollars off of their backs, but this money is never ever put back into their communities. And that is a big concern of mine. I know yesterday the governor did not sign off on what was passed, you know, kind of what to do with the CARES funding. She had some amendments. I haven't read those amendments, but I'm interested in seeing what those amendments are. And she's going to be true to what she said that she would do initially. But it's scary times. Our numbers, we didn't even meet the level 1 criteria, and we were reopening again. And that's very concerning. And you think of the number of people who live in poverty here. And it's just, you know, it's a lot to digest on a daily basis. But you know, you have to continue doing the work.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you is self-care, you know. How do you take care of yourself? One, not only, you know, dealing with some of the dynamics you mentioned associated with COVID and being in your community and knowing the community inside and out, but also doing the work you're doing, fighting white supremacy, white privilege, and other forms of oppression. I mean, how do you take care of yourself in the day-to-day grind of fighting for equity and justice?
Okay, so we're going to have to go back to the Civil Rights Memorial Center for this one. Because, you know, how I really take care of myself is because I do consider myself a servant leader, right? And we know being servant leaders, oftentimes you can give out more than you receive. But I always go back to the memorial and the people we honor on that memorial, and understanding that there would be no Southern Poverty Law Center if there had been no people of the movement, and just really thinking about all of the things that they worked through to get me to where I am. I do believe our ancestors live in us. I think that they drive us. And so that's one thing that keeps me focused on the work, right? And knowing that this is a divine assignment, and divine assignment will take me. But on a personal note, I do pray, I meditate, and I oftentimes, especially being closed in now, I've never considered myself to be a person of like high anxiety. But when this stuff first happened, I remember just like my chest tightening, and I was like, what is going on? Like, I've never responded to stress like this, but realizing like, girl, you've never been through anything like this, right? And so really pulling on my friends to offer some tips on how I can take care of that anxiety. And so, you know, just keeping my mental wellness at the forefront. And that's what's really helping me. It's just like, it's not secondary. Like, my mental wellness is at the very forefront, and that allows me to do what's secondary, which is this work, right? Because work does not, you know, this work does not stop. You know, we do it with our families. We do it with our friends. It's not just with the colleagues that we work with in these institutions and organizations, because we understand, you know, this whole evolution of change has to go beyond kind of these structural walls that we're in, and we really have to dig deep with our communities. And I use social media. You know, at one point I was like, you know, I'm not gonna be talking about work on social media, because, you know, my mom was just like, stop talking about all that race stuff on Facebook, getting people mad. You know, she'll, don't post nothing about the president no more, getting people mad. I'm like, I don't care about getting people mad. But then, you know, it's like, you know what, this is the time to really, really be utilizing social media. And even when people don't agree with me, engaging in those conversations with them, and educating and increasing awareness and giving them the resources and tools to form their own, you know, kind of thought process and how they move forward.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Can you tell us what's on the horizon, the next 10 years? What do you got planned? What do you see yourself doing? You gonna go after that mayoral seat, that governorship? I mean, what's on the horizon for Tafeni English as you look at the next 10 years?
You know, I've always considered myself, people would always say, oh, you need to run for office. And I've always said, no, I can work behind the scenes. I can help develop you. I can connect you to the community. I can do that. And so just in recent months, I'm like, girl, you need to get yourself on a trajectory here. You've got to get in office, because that's where we're going to really see the change, right? And not being a person who gets in office and just doesn't do anything. So maybe we'll see that. But what I do know is that whatever I'll be doing, social justice will be at the core component of that. And shifting this political madness that we've been living under for centuries. So those are the two key things that I definitely will continue to be involved in, for sure. Yeah. And it's a movement building. We've got to get some movement building going. I was on a call with Richard Rothstein last week. He's the author of The Color of Law. And he said, we need a new movement. And I thought, wow, the one we're in is still fairly new. But yeah, so definitely doing some grassroots movement building work.
So I got a little lightning round here I was going to ask you to participate in. These are just short little things I'm going to ask you to respond to or offer your opinion in 15, 30 seconds. For example, colorism. What's your thought? Colorism.
So, Eddie. So I do believe that there is a difference. I know people will argue that there's not a difference between racism and colorism, but we know within our community, skin color does matter. And I do think that that is something that we have to move beyond when we're talking about identity and the value of who people are. 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about
you can't give people 30 seconds to answer questions like this.
I got so many more for you. How about code switching?
Oh, okay. Code switching, it is a real thing. I've been guilty of it myself. And one of the things that I definitely have been more intentional about, I was in DC about 2 years ago, and I was on the phone with my niece, and she said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I'm in these settings where I have to code switch, and I'm frustrated by it, and I need to be delivered." So it is a real thing, but I also think that it is something that we've been trained and taught to do, and it's part of that whole being accepted regardless of. All right, done.
Yeah. You going with Taylor Swift or Lady Gaga?
Eddie, you froze on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
You said Taylor Swift or Lady Gaga?
Who you going with?
Lady Gaga.
NWA or Public Enemy?
Public Enemy.
Justin Bieber or Justin Timberlake?
Woo, Justin Timberlake.
Richard Pryor or Steve Harvey?
Richard Pryor.
Beyonce or Janet Jackson?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm gonna have to stick with my girl Janet. I'm gonna have to stick with Janet.
Whitney or Tina Turner?
What? I can't choose both of them. Both, I can't choose.
You going with Kerry
I love my
Washington?
Whitney.
You going with Kerry Washington or Viola Davis?
Viola Davis.
Tyler Perry or Spike Lee?
Spike Lee.
Will Smith or Denzel?
Will. No. I'm gonna have to go with Denzel.
You going with The Wire or you going with New Jack City?
New Jack City.
You going with
only because I did. Now look, my black card might be revoked for this, but I never watched The Wire.
Okay, it's not too late. It's not too late.
I know.
It's not too late.
I've been told that that's what I can do in this quarantine.
You going with Cardi B or Nicki Minaj?
Nicki Minaj.
Oh, nice. Tupac or Biggie?
What? Eddie, you can't. No. Okay. I'm gonna have to go with Tupac. I'm gonna have to go with Tupac.
Listen, if I come to Alabama, anybody coming to Alabama, so much to do. What's the top 3 or 4 things you say you got to do if you come to Alabama, Montgomery specifically in that area?
All right. If you come to Montgomery, you definitely have to stop by the Civil Rights Memorial Center. The second thing is you have to stop by Equal Justice Initiatives, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, their Legacy Museum, and their new pavilion. And the third thing is, it's hard to pick between these two, but if you were to go to the church or the parsonage, my vote would be to go to the church because the docent there has so much information on Dr. King that I don't think a lot of people know, and you'll walk out singing songs. So definitely those are the top 3.
Listen.
And I'll add a fourth. You got to eat you some healthy soul food, but you can't come to the South and not eat. Yeah.
There's some healthy soul food.
Healthy soul food, I promise you, is here.
Oh, all right. Well, actually, we were ready to come to Montgomery for one of our conferences we do every year, the National Association of Multicultural Education. I don't know if it's still going to happen this fall, but if it does, I'll definitely let you know.
Please let me know. Please let me know. And I will definitely work things out for you. I'll have it down packed for you.
Well, I think it was almost 1999, 2000, somewhere in there, we initially connected with Jennifer in the center, and I've always appreciated you and the folks there supporting me in the White Privilege Conference. And I feel like after 20 years, we're still so unknown. Maybe we'll be that new, part of that new movement that Brother Rothstein was talking about. No matter what, we appreciate you collaborating. And as long as you'll come to the party, you're invited to the party because we appreciate your work and your collaboration. Well, thank you, Eddie. I appreciate you. And, I was so happy to run into you. And of course, I've kept up with you. So good stuff. And you are part of the new movement now. You definitely are. Well, we're happy to be in collaboration with the center. Give my love, my hugs to everybody there. You take care. Here's a big Wakanda for you, sister. Yes. All yes. Right. Thank you. Right. Appreciate you. Take care, my brother. All right. Absolutely. Sis. Peace. All right. Bye, Jenny. Jenny,
bye-bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.